There we go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And now take it away, Jolina. Thank you.
Thank you. So first of all, it's lovely to see what faces I can see. If anybody else is willing to turn on their video, I always love to see facial expressions. It's good for my ego to know if I'm connecting or not. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. So thank you to the board for inviting me to speak again. And thank you to all of you for showing up tonight on this gorgeous night in the mountains. I'm over in Frisco, but I assume it's just as beautiful over in Vail as it is here. So I appreciate you taking the time to show up tonight. I have to admit that whenever I'm invited to do a presentation, there's always a lot of emotion that comes up for me. There's both excitement and enthusiasm and like the hope that I will dazzle you all with fabulous, valuable information. And then the other side of that, of course, is the anxiety and the fear that I won't say anything new or interesting, and I'll disappoint you and all of that. So I just wanted to name kind of what goes on for me as I start these presentations. And with that, I'm going to take a nice deep breath, which you're welcome to join me in, and kind of settle into myself. So I've been thinking a lot about what I really wanted to share tonight. There's a lot that I love to talk about, but the thing that kept coming up for me as I was thinking about what really is the core of the message that I want to share, the one thing that kept coming up over and over again for me was how much we need each other in difficult times, right? How much we need the support of peers and friends, and especially people who can listen to us in times of stress. When the board and I first talked about doing a presentation, I offered this subject, overwhelm, how to manage overwhelm, how to make decisions, how to come back to ourselves and lead from within. I suggested that based on what I was hearing from a lot of my clients and my friends. This was back, I think in March we started talking. So we were right at the beginning of the COVID lockdown, and overwhelm was one of the words that I heard over and over and over again. One of the first people I talked with was a financial advisor. And with tears running down her face, she talked about her clients, with many of whom she'd worked for decades, talking about how they were losing their life savings as the market crashed. And her feeling was of total overwhelm because they were all looking to her for advice, to be told what to do, and she didn't know what to do. Another person that I talked with works for one of the towns over here in Summit, and she was part of the board that was making decisions on shutting down businesses and sending tourists home, knowing how devastating that was going to be on local businesses. And again, the words I heard were, it's overwhelming to think of what's happening to people, and I don't know what else to do. Right? And then there was the business owner who had many employees, some of whom she was going to have to lay off. And she talked about her anger and frustration and confusion and the overwhelm that came with knowing how much they were going to struggle, and once again, not knowing what to do about it. And then there was my friend, who is good friends of one of the mothers whose sons committed suicide. And my friend talked about the overwhelm that she felt as she thought about what her friend must have been going through. And again, the sentence, I don't know what to do to help, right? So this feeling of overwhelm seems to have been everywhere. And I just want to check in with you guys, those that I can see, or type into the chat. Do you relate? Right, by a show of hands, who relates to some of these stories? I'm seeing hands. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I wanted to offer a couple of tools today. So specifically what we're going to talk about, I want to give you 2 tools that you can use for yourself to manage overwhelm. And then one tool that you can use with each other to help each other manage overwhelm, come back to yourselves, and then lead from within. So the first two tools together, if you're in that place of feeling overwhelmed, feeling confused, feeling angry, feeling emotionally exhausted by what's going on, and you're sitting with a feeling of, I don't know what to do, what I'm going to recommend is that you stop trying to do anything. And rather, just for a little while, be present with what is. Right? So how do you do that exactly? The first thing is to name it to tame it. So first two tools, name it to tame it. Simply make a statement, tell a story about what it is that you're going through. So exactly as I did when we started this, I named what I was experiencing, the excitement and the enthusiasm, and at the same time, the anxiety that was there. There's something that happens when we name our experiences rather than trying to avoid them, that actually has a calming effect. Part of what we're doing is we're shifting our brain functioning back up to the frontal cortex, which is where our cognitive thinking comes from, right? And I'm going to go into a model of the brain just to put this in context. So that's the first tool, is name it to tame it. You simply tell yourself the story that you're experiencing of what's going on. And the attitude that's so important here is one of curiosity, right? It's not wrong that you're feeling overwhelmed. It's not wrong that you're feeling mad or angry or frustrated or scared or inadequate or insecure or any of those things. Our emotions are nothing more than messengers, right? Our emotions are nothing to be afraid of. They're simply giving us information about how well we're doing at living according to our highest priorities in life. So they're just messengers. So as you tell yourself the story of, in this moment, I feel overwhelmed. In this moment, my heart is pounding. In this moment, it's hard to breathe. In this moment, I'm so fucking scared. Yes, swearing is completely allowed if that's your normal language, which for me it is. Okay, so now I'm feeling a little bit of embarrassment because it just popped out. But you name what's going on for you. Right now I'm feeling whatever it is that you're feeling. And just let that be with an air of curiosity. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting that right now I can feel my cheeks are getting red because I'm feeling a little embarrassed for that F-bomb. So you name what's going on for you, and then you breathe, right? So when we're starting to feel overwhelmed, our nervous system is starting to slide into being sympathetic dominant. I know you're all familiar with the fight or flight response, right? So as we go into overwhelm, our brain function starts sliding back towards the brainstem, which is where our fight or flight thinking, if you can call it thinking, responding comes from, reacting comes from, right? We will go into fight or flight when we perceive that the danger around us is weak enough or slow enough for us to beat or outrun, right? So we'll fight if we think that the threat is weak enough that we can actually prevail, or we'll flee if we think the threat is slow enough that we can outrun it, right? You don't have to be the fastest person on the block, right? You just have to be faster. You just have to be the second slowest, faster than one other person. So we'll only fight or flee when we think that fighting or fleeing is going to get us what we need or what we want. If we perceive the threat to be too big or too fast for us to prevail against, the only option we have is to freeze and fall asleep. We go into a sort of catatonic possum, we play possum, right? So if you're experiencing either running around like a chicken with your head cut off, trying to do everything and doing nothing effectively, or you find yourself in a state of sort of paralysis, not really knowing what to do, please know that both of these are sympathetic nervous system responses, right? Breathing is one of the fastest mechanisms we have, most effective mechanisms we have to bring our nervous system from being stuck in fight or flight, sympathetic dominance, back towards parasympathetic or rest and relaxation. Okay. So I'm going to describe two types of breathing. If you're feeling yourself overwhelmed, if you're feeling the emotion churning, if you're going into fight or flight, or if you're starting to feel yourself just shut down and sort of blank out, not knowing what to do, the thing to do is to take short in breaths and long out breaths. Right? So let's do 3 of those together. And when you do these breaths, I want you to breathe in through your nose and then out through pursed lips. So you're blowing out through pursed lips. This is really important, especially in times of COVID, because you're actually strengthening your lungs by breathing out through pursed lips. So it would look like this. Let's do 3 of them together. So you're going to take a deep breath in through your nose and then a long out breath. Deep breath in through your nose. Long out breath. Let's do one more. Deep breath in. Long out breath. Just a few of those breaths can start to calm your nervous system and start to bring your nervous system back from sympathetic dominance towards parasympathetic. Now, you don't necessarily want to go all the way into parasympathetic falling asleep. Really what you want is to be integrated and present in your body. And a present, integrated, homeostatic nervous system has equal in-breaths and equal out-breaths. So your nervous system follows your breathing. Okay? So just 6 minutes of doing regulated breathing, where you breathe in for a count of 4 and out for a count of 4, will help to regulate, and it actually strengthens the nervous system. So again, let's do 3 of those together just so you get the feel of it. So we're going to breathe in for 4 and out for 4, and I'll count us through. Okay, so we're going to breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. And breathe in, 2, 3, 4. And out, 2, 3, 4. And in, 2, 3, 4. And out, 2, 3, 4. So it's as simple as that. And 6 minutes has been shown to have a profound effect on the nervous system. If you guys already are not doing some sort of mindfulness practice, I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. It's like a muscle that we have to exercise so that in times of stress, it's sort of an automatic response from us. So highly recommend developing a mindfulness practice. So those were the first 2 tools. Name it to tame it, and then breathing in a way that starts to regulate the nervous system. The third tool that I want to share is what I call mindful listening. So I run a 6-week program where we deconstruct the 4 components of mindful listening for catalytic conversations. There's more information on that on my website if you want it. There's also a PDF that you can download that has these 4 components on it. And Laura said she'd send out my contact information tomorrow, so you can just download it if you want to do that. So with mindful listening, there's something really extraordinary that happens when we have the experience of somebody really paying us attention, right? Does anyone know what I'm talking about? When those moments when you feel like the other person is giving you their full attention and they're really seeing you and hearing you. They're understanding where you're coming from, and they're appreciating you for being exactly who you are, right? This experience of feeling seen and heard, understood and appreciated is absolutely necessary for us to come back to ourselves. Right? So I started this saying that one of the main takeaways that I wanted you guys to get, or one of the things that was coming up as I was thinking about this talk tonight, was just how much we need each other in times of difficulty. That sentiment actually goes deeper than just in times of difficulty. We actually need each other in order to know ourselves. So we cannot know ourselves in a vacuum. It's only through our relationships that we know who we are. And when we have a listening partner who's skillful in their responses and knows what to say and how to say it, when to say it, in such a way that you end up feeling seen and heard, understood and appreciated, it actually has an integrating effect on your brain, as well as a psychological effect of helping you know yourself. Does that make sense? Yeah. By the way, if you have questions as we go through this, please just type them in the chat. I think Laurie's helping me will help me sort of stay on top of the questions. So we need conversation with each other, and specifically conversation in which we feel seen and heard, understood and appreciated, in order for us not only to know ourselves psychologically, but to help integrate the parts of the brain that make us the best versions of our human selves that we can possibly be. So to make sense of this, I want to share a model of the brain that I learned from Dr. Dan Siegel, who's one of the leaders in interpersonal neurobiology or neuropsychology. And it's a very handy model, and we all have one. So if you would, raise your hand, fold your thumb in, and then fold your fingers over your thumb. And this fist now makes a very lovely representation of one hemisphere of the brain. So whole brain would be two fists together, but I'm not going to spend the rest of the hour like this. So we're just going to use one hemisphere. Okay. So the three parts of the brain, actually there are four parts of the brain that I'm going to talk about that are important when it comes to conversing and supporting each other, are first and foremost the brain stem, which is represented by the palm of your hand. So your forearm represents your central spinal column, which comes up through the center of your spine and ends in the back of your skull as the brain stem. This is the most primitive part of the brain. There's no creative thinking here. This is just about black and white thinking. It's very reactive, and its job is to send you into fight or flight in response to any perceived threat. Okay, that's its job, just to send you into fight or flight if there is perceived threat around you. The next part of the brain that we're going to talk about is the limbic system, which would be represented in our handy model by the thumb. And the two main parts of the limbic system that I want to mention are the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala is concerned with emotional charge, with feelings, and the hippocampus is concerned with memory. So memory and emotions are the main components of the limbic system that are relevant for this presentation. Over that, if you fold your fingers, we have the cortex. Now this is the sort of most sophisticated part of the brain. It takes a long time to develop, but this is where our logical thinking comes from. It's where our language skills exist. It's where our ability to solve problems arises, right? When we're in emotional overload or overwhelm, what's starting to happen is these three parts of the brain are losing their connectivity with one another. Cortisol actually helps to break connections between these parts of the brain. So literally, if we're taking in information from the outside world and it's registering as challenge, threat, conflict, confusion, incongruence, things appearing one way but not feeling the way they appear, that kind of incongruence actually registers as threat in the brain, right? Would you all agree there's a lot of incongruence in the world right now, right? So there are a lot of things that are registering in the brain as threat. One way to think of your brain is think of the brainstem as a hot plate on the stove. Think of the limbic system as a pot of water on that hot plate. And then the cortex, you can think of as the lid on that pot of water. So as information is coming in, all the threats that we're perceiving around us, all the challenges, all the emotional charges that we're feeling because we're worried about people around us, all of our inability to figure out how to make their pain go away is like adding fuel to this burner, right? The amygdala, our pot of water, is starting to boil, right? Our emotional centers are starting to feel a little overwhelmed. It's like the water in the pot is starting to boil. And if we cannot disperse that energy somehow, the end result is what's called amygdala hijack. And what happens is we flip our lids, right? And in a flipped lid state, we cannot make decisions. We can't think rationally. We can't even, in many cases, be responsible for ourselves, let alone for anybody else. I learned this from a friend of mine who's a doctor up in Canada, and he said in moments of real stress, like when he's telling somebody that they have a diagnosis of cancer, he said it's absolutely natural that they will go into amygdala hijack. Thinking goes offline, and in those moments, he said, the patient has to hand responsibility for their well-being over to somebody else. In his case, him, the doctor. And his responsibility then becomes to hold space for that patient until they can gather enough information that they calm their brain, their amygdala calms down, their frontal cortex comes back online, and they can once again assume responsibility for themselves. So if you've had experiences of feeling overwhelmed and you felt yourself go offline and you just cannot figure out what to do, please know that that's normal. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not alone. In fact, you're not even supposed to be able to figure it out by yourself. This is where we need the people around us to be skilled enough to be able to get present with us and listen in a way that gives us space to tell our stories in ways that we start hearing our own wisdom reflected back to us until we get to a point when we can reassume responsibility for ourselves. Does that make sense? I feel like I just said a whole lot of words. Again, if there's questions, just type them. Question, is anxiety a result of flipping your lid? I would say that anxiety, it's actually the other way around. Flipping your lid would be a result of anxiety. So anxiety arises from the conundrum of knowing that whatever you do, you're going to experience both positive and negative, pain and pleasure, right? So typically how we're typically navigating in life is we're typically trying to find solutions that have a whole lot of positives and no negatives, or very, very few negatives. Okay, here's a different way of thinking about this. And this is coming, if we go a little deeper into the philosophy from which I operate, from my worldview, it is absolutely impossible to have a positive without a negative, or a negative without a positive. We cannot have pain without pleasure, and we can't have pleasure with pain. The two are two sides of the same coin, right? So this might fly a little bit in the face of positive thinking, which preaches that you can have positive without negative. You can't. It flies in the face of universal laws. So it's wiser, in my opinion, instead of trying to make decisions on what to do based on an unrealistic expectation that you can get pleasure without pain or positive without negative, which you can't. So that sends you into anxiety because some part of you can see that you can't have one without the other. It's much wiser, in my opinion, to think of solutions in terms of pain plus pleasure. So if I take X action, I'm going to get this pleasure, but that pain. If I take Y action, I'm going to get this pleasure, but that pain. Then which of those couples, which of those pairs of pain and pleasure is most likely to move me in the direction of my highest priorities? So part of coming back to ourselves and leading from the inside out requires us to know what our authentic inner priorities or value systems are. Right? And I'm not going to go into that right now, if there's time at the end, I can give some information on how you do that. But seeing as that question came up, I just want to say that part of coming back to ourselves does require us to know what our highest priorities are, from which arise our purpose and our mission. So thank you for that question. Okay, so where was I? I was talking about the brain, the 3 parts of the brain. Okay, there's a 4th part of the brain that I want to mention. And that part of the brain sits right about where our middle 2 fingernails would be if we're using this handy model. And this part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. Okay. This is the part of the brain that takes about 26 years to develop, so they say. We don't come into the world with this part of the brain developed. It takes time for it to develop. But it's an extraordinarily important part of our human brain. It's the part of the brain from which compassion comes, empathy, our ability to regulate our body functions, and our ability to regulate our emotions. Intuition comes from the prefrontal cortex. Morals and ethics appear to come from the prefrontal cortex. And our ability to know ourselves as an individual in space-time comes from the prefrontal cortex. So it's a super important part of the brain. I think you'll agree, right? Here's the magical piece. This is why I'm so passionate about sharing how to be great listeners, mindful listeners. There has been one thing and one thing only that's been shown to develop, but this is according to Dan Siegel, that's been shown to develop this part of the brain. Anyone want to guess what that is? You can type it in the chat. Love, good answer. Talking with other people, good answer. There is specific conflict, that's interesting. Emotion, interesting. So the one thing that has been shown to stimulate the growth of this part of the brain is the experience of feeling seen and heard, understood, and appreciated. In psychological terms, they call it attunement. It's the experience of feeling attuned to by someone else or with someone else. In my language, we have that experience when we feel seen and heard, understood, and appreciated. And whoever said love on that list, we feel loved when we feel seen and heard, understood, and appreciated. So it's that feeling of seen, of being felt, of being known, and of being loved for who we are that actually stimulates the development of what are called integrative neurons that go from the frontal cortex down to the brainstem, through the amygdala, or through the limbic system and up to the frontal cortex. So the more experiences we have of feeling seen and heard, understood, and appreciated for being who we are, the more we actually grow a superhighway of neurons to transport information very rapidly between these different parts of the brain. If we do not get many experiences of feeling seen and heard, understood, and appreciated, we don't develop very many connections between these parts of the brain. So flipping our lids happens way more often, right? So teenagers, think teenagers, they don't have a whole lot of neurons developed yet. So you're starting to get a sense of why being the kind of listener that can help somebody else feel seen and heard, understood, and appreciated, the gift that you're giving them is phenomenal, right? The gift that you're giving with your mindful attention and your skills at the things that I'm going to go into is an absolute beautiful gift, not just for co-workers in the working environment, but for your children, for your spouse, for anybody around you with whom you happen to interact. I hope this is exciting to you as it is to me. So let me find in my notes what I wanted to say next. Okay. All right. So there are 4 skills to being a mindful listener. And by the way, one of the terms that I coined was catalytic conversations, because the kind of conversations that I'm interested in having with people and that I'm interested in sharing with other people how to have are the kinds of conversations that literally change us for the better, right? And to me, anything that stimulates more neural integration in the brain and helps somebody feel valuable enough that somebody is actually paying attention to them, which in turn helps them feel valued, that changes people. And to me, those are worthwhile pursuits. So the full name of the program is Mindful Listening for Catalytic Conversations, and there are 4 components to being that kind of listener. I'll give you the 4 components, and then I'll link it back to the brain. I'll give you an example of what it might sound like, and then we're going to break into dyads and experiment with this, as long as our technology works. So the 4 components are the ability to reflect what somebody else is saying. The second is the ability to empathize effectively. The third is the ability to validate with authenticity. And the fourth is the ability to redirect the speaker back towards themselves and their own inner wisdom. So if you guys have studied active listening, or can't think what some of the other names of listening systems are, you might have heard these 4 components. I want to add in just a few little tweaks to at least the things that I've heard out there. So the ability to reflect. When you're reflecting somebody, the intention with reflecting somebody is to calm the brain stem, right? Remember, the brain stem is very black and white. There's no creative thinking here. It's very reactive. It's very primitive, this part of the brain. So when you're reflecting somebody, be like the brain stem. Be black and white. You reflect just the facts. You don't embellish. Use their words as much as possible so that this part of the brain doesn't have to think about, like if somebody says, a guy cut me off in traffic, and you reflect back, so a guy turned in front of you in traffic. It's not exactly the same thing. And there's a little bit of incongruence between what the person said and what you're reflecting back, which can actually activate the brainstem. And I know there's discussion in the world of communication about whether you should use somebody's words when you're reflecting back, or whether you should tell them your interpretation of what they're saying. My experience has been it's way more effective and way less pressure on you, the listener, to just reflect the words that they're using. Okay. And there are ways to do it to where you don't sound like a parrot, but as we play with this, you might sound like a parrot. Just go with it for now. So that's the first step, is the ability to actually reflect what somebody's saying. When you can use somebody else's words, it lets them know that, my gosh, you're actually listening to them, right? You're not spending time interpreting what they're saying. You're actually just listening to them. So it's a tremendously powerful thing just to be able to reflect. So what I'm hearing you say is, and you use their words. The second component is the ability to empathize. So empathy is making some sort of statement that acknowledges that you are recognizing their feelings, right? And it can sound very much like reflection, but using emotive words. So what I'm hearing is that you're really sad. What I'm hearing is that this is very upsetting to you, if that's what they've said. So what I'm hearing is this is making you really mad, or this is causing you to feel overwhelmed. You just reflect back the emotive words that you're hearing from them. And again, the discussion about whether to use their words or not, feel the difference in this. And this is a couple that I worked with. that was splitting up after he had an affair and he wanted to leave the marriage. And so she was expressing how she felt, and she said it hurts to be rejected. And he reflected back, so what I'm hearing is you hate to be rejected. Can you feel the difference in that? It's like a totally different meaning with those words. So to avoid that, use the words that somebody is saying to you, right? The next component, the third component, is the ability to validate authentically. So validation sounds like, it makes sense to me that you feel whatever it is that they're feeling because, right? That little word because is so important. It makes sense to me that you feel angry because, and then it's up to you to fill in the blank with something that is actually true to you. So if we go back to the example of the man leaving his wife, that could sound like, it makes sense to me that you feel hurt at being rejected because I know when I've been rejected, I know that I have felt hurt, right? That little piece of validation is something that seems to get left out in a lot of conversations. Like I'll often hear people say, oh, it makes sense to me that you're angry, but you should feel positive. Or it makes sense to me that you feel sad, but this isn't something that you should be sad about. So that just blows it. So empathy plus validation are what we need, right? The fourth component, the redirect. Again, the tweak here is the redirect should always be about redirecting the speaker back to themselves, right? So a good redirect can sound something like, so what do you need to move forward? What would feel helpful to you right now? How can you proceed from this point? Can you hear that the language is all about the speaker? What do you need? What would feel good to you? Right? It's not about us going, what do you need me to do? How can I help you? The intention here is to redirect the speaker back in towards themselves so that they get an opportunity to feel into what would be helpful to me right now. How can I solve my own problem in this situation, right? When we do the other, which is say, how can I help you? We actually disempower the speaker. So, does that make sense? Does it sound interesting? The 4 components of mindful listening seem to be tools. Absolutely, diversity and inclusion. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, Courtney, I'd love to talk more about that. I'm not sure who you are in the pictures because I don't see your name. Oh man, I do that all the time. Literally just hung up with a coworker and said, please let me know how I can help you. This is a very female thing to do, isn't it? We're so conditioned to take care of others. And this is part of the overwhelm that all of us are experiencing, is when we're so busy looking out there to get information on who's struggling, who's suffering, how can I help, what can I do? And we have to come back to ourselves. We have to put our own oxygen mask on, to use a very cliched expression, but we have to make ourselves the most important component of any relationship, right? I'm going to go off on a little tangent that I didn't plan on, but I'm going to say it anyway. There are 3 types of relationships. There's the careful, careless, and caring. The careless relationship looks like one person with their own particular hierarchy of values, looking at another person with their particular hierarchy of values and saying, I care less about what's important to you. You need to do it my way. This is the careless relationship. Just think parenting, the way we're typically taught to parent. I care less about what's important to you. I know better. Do it my way. So it's the most celebrated form of careless relationship. The careful relationship is just the opposite. Careful relationship, you've got yourself and what's important to you down in the pit relative to somebody else. You've got their particular value system on a pedestal and you're making them more important than you. And you're walking on eggshells. This is the careful relationship. The caring relationship has three components. First and foremost, you care enough about you to figure out what your highest priorities are. What are your values? What are the things and experiences that enliven you, that make you feel enthused, that actually feel meaningful to you? And you don't make yourself wrong for that. You honor that that is who you are. That is what's important to you. The second part of the caring relationship is you put your attention on the other person and you observe what it is that's actually important to them. And you don't make them wrong for that. You honor that that's who they are. That's what drives them in life. And then the third component is you learn to communicate in a way that leaves both of you feeling seen and heard, understood and appreciated. So we're back to the conversation piece. Okay, so we have about 12 minutes left. What I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to connect with one another and just feel what it feels like to have one person be the speaker and the other person be the listener whose commitment is to listen, to keep listening in a way that helps you, the speaker, feel seen and heard, understood and appreciated. Right? So as best you can, speaker, be kind to your listener, give them opportunities to interject with comments and sounds that show that they are hearing you. So opportunities to reflect your words and your feelings. And then if it feels appropriate at the end, speakers, you get to try out the sentence. So what would be helpful to you right now? So I'm going to give speakers listeners, two things for you to say, because listeners, you're not going to just stay mute. You're going to be interacting somewhat. But the two main things I want you to say, first and foremost, to keep the other person talking. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. So you've got that one sentence until, if it feels appropriate, the redirect. So what would be helpful to you right now? Does this make sense, hopefully? So I'm going to break you into dyads. If you've not done this before, what's going to happen is you're going to see a little box on your screen. It's going to come up and say, you're in group number 2 or 3 or whatever. You need to hit the accept button or join group button. I'm not sure what it says. I'm going to give you just 5 minutes. No, I'm going to give you 6 minutes. At 5 minutes, you will see something on the screen that says you have 1 minute left. So that'll be your time to decide if you're going to ask the redirect question or not. Totally up to you. And then we'll come back into the group, and I believe we have till 6:15. So we'll do some feedback on what that was like. Between the two of you, you decide who's going to be the speaker and who's going to be the listener. Speakers, talk about something that might have been challenging for you or a question that you've been trying to answer. I think you probably get more out of this if you do that, but also please don't feel like you have to go really deep and personal. This is not the venue for that. So I'll let you use your wisdom to choose whatever it is you want to talk about. Okay, if there are any questions, just type them in the chat. If you're on mute, you should be able to unmute yourself with the bottom left mute button. And let's see, there are 18 people. So we're going to break out into, there we go. You may be in threes because we're an odd number. If that's the case, the third person will just have to be the observer. Hope you're all good with that. Okay, here we go.
Oh, ooh, this is.
There we go. Okay. So I think everybody's back. So let's have some feedback from those of you who would like to share. How was that? How was it to be the listener? How was it to be the speaker? How well did you do at just saying those 2 sentences? If you got to the second one, 6 minutes went fast. Yes, it did. And you can just unmute yourself and speak. It's easier than typing.
Well, I thought it was good to be the listener because I'm the talker a lot of times. So it was nice just to listen and not interject, just listen to what you were telling me and focus on you rather than something else. I thought it was a good exercise.
So question for you and anybody else, what are you focusing on normally when someone else is talking?
Kind of relating to maybe what you're saying and what's going on in my life. And that's probably selfish, or maybe that's just human nature, but you know, that somehow relating to what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Anyone have the experience of, as you're listening to someone talking, you're thinking about what you're going to say, what story you're going to share? Mm-hmm. So yes, it is human nature to try to relate what somebody else is saying to our experiences. We can't help ourselves. That is what we do. The question is, what do we do with that information? Do we hijack the conversation and make it about us? Or can we hold our egos in check and hold the focus on the other person? More feedback?
I felt like in my partnership, it was kind of like I'm usually the listener and she's usually the talker, and so we switched roles and I talked, and it like took me a minute to even think about something that I could possibly talk about. But I think it was a little bit refreshing for both of us. We actually just exchanged emails and we're going to talk more.
Oh, nice.
Oh,
Thank you. I love the word refreshing. Does anybody else have that experience where you know that the other person has some sort of commitment to just be the listener and hold space for you? That there is an element of refreshing or refreshingness or relief to that?
It's almost like, it's so interesting to do this exercise with people you don't know, because you have that space with people, I'm not going to say you've known for a long time, but people you are close to or have some kind of strong relationship to. So it's like it's like exercise when you're doing it with someone else. Like it takes tons and tons of concentration. And because I'm obviously I talk a lot. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, but it's so interesting to like have to get into that mindset, you know, when you don't know who this person is or how they're going to communicate.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll just say that. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I shared with my part. I was the talker, and there were 2 things. You know, when you direct people, and when like I'm directed back to my inner wisdom, like the answers are already within a lot of times, and sometimes so often I seek solutions and answers and advice from other people to get that validation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like if I can just continue to learn to trust that like inner wisdom, I feel like I can move forward without making other people my decision makers or needing that approval. So I noticed that. And then I know also when I'm listening to something, like it happened today at lunch, I had a work meeting and he was talking and I was still 30 minutes back, like at my last conversation. And I really had to be like, you're here now. You need to listen. Because I mean, he can tell, like if he's talking about he did this hike and I ask some question that has no relation, but it really is like a discipline that continues to improve. But sometimes if work's real busy or frenetic and then I have to be present in a conversation, I really have to just like stop all the stuff back there. So that can be challenging, but.
It does take discipline, and I want to say something about that. Thank you for bringing that up. You know, part of being a good listener is knowing ourselves and loving ourselves enough to set boundaries. So part of being a mindful and skillful listener is being mindful about what we need in order to be a good listener for somebody. So you have every right to say, you know, I really, I can't give you the attention that you need right this second. I need 5 minutes to decompress from my last meeting, or we need to schedule a time to talk. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So please know that part of being a great listener does not mean you have to keep dropping what you're doing in order to give full attention to somebody around you. You take care of you first, and you will be the best listener when your needs are being met. Does that make sense? Hopefully that helps.
I was just going to say, I was paired with Carol, and we both did both roles. We gave each other the opportunity to do it each way, and it was a nice illustration to show that you can utilize those different skills, both as the speaker and as the listener, and still you know, have effective communication. But it is different roles, but being able for both of us to experience that, I think, was really very helpful.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, there's one of the things that I suggest with people is to give each other 10 minutes. So especially if I'm working with couples or people who are in conflict, the practice is that each person gets 10 minutes to be the speaker, with the commitment from the listener that they will really be the listener. And I think I've helped stave off some divorces. The other thing that got staved off through somebody's listening skills was in South Africa. One of my clients was CFO of a really big logistics company, about 9,000 employees. And he had taken a sabbatical, came back to work. And when he came back, his company was going into the 12th week of a 12-week negotiation to resolve a dispute. And if they didn't resolve it by the end of the week, the workers were going to put down tools and go on strike. And he came in on the Monday morning with these tools, which he had been learning from me. And his intention was to give every single person time to just speak, and his commitment was that he would listen. He would listen. He would be the kind of listener who really made them feel seen and heard, understood and appreciated. And by Thursday night, they had a resolution. I was very excited for him. Anyone else want to give any feedback on what that was like, or if you have any questions about that?
One of the things that I try and practice at work, it's really hard because I have junior people that work with me and for me, is not telling them just like this, like trying not to give them advice, although I did give Kristen advice. But so what I ask them to do is, if you have a challenge or a problem or something you're trying to solve, come to me with 2 or 3 options. And then at that point, I just let them talk through it. And then just like Courtney, I think, was saying, or no, sorry, I'm looking at the screen. Maybe she's gone. Was saying, you know, kind of in your heart. I mean, not in your heart. Okay, it could be your brain, it could be your heart, it could be your intuition. You kind of might already have the solution, but you need to work through it. So, and I found that that's worked really well, especially for people who are newer to the employment world.
I think that's fantastic. You know, to say, come to me with several ideas for solutions. It's so empowering because you're saying, I trust you, that you can come up with some solutions, and then you can refine from there. So certainly this is not about never giving advice. But it is about, before you jump in and try to fix things too soon and deny the other person the experience of developing their own confidence because they can come up with their own solutions, this is about giving some space for that to potentially happen, right? But if you say to somebody, what do you need right now for this? And they are completely blank, and say, I have absolutely no idea, then certainly you can step in and say, well, I have some ideas. Do you want to hear them? I think the mistake that we make too often is we jump too quickly into giving our advice. And again, so much of this comes from our ego, right? It feels good to be helpful, right? We get our kudos. We get kudos for being saviors and helpers and wise women, etc., etc. So this is one of the challenges with the redirect is we have to be quiet. So anyway, the invitation here is to give the other person an opportunity to feel into themselves. What is it that they could do for themselves right now? And then if they're completely blank, or if they ask for your ideas, then offer your ideas. So it's definitely not about not ever giving advice, but it's certainly about empowering them with an opportunity to solve their own problems. So if there are no more questions, I am looking at the time, 6:10. I just want to recap some of the things that we talked about today. So the 3 tools that I talked about, first and foremost, was name it to tame it and breathe. So if you're in that overwhelmed state, not sure what to do, stop trying to do anything and be present with what is. Speak it out loud. It brings your brain functioning up to your frontal cortex. I'm feeling right now in this moment, I'm feeling quite joyful. I'm feeling quite grateful and a little bit bubbly, actually, at having had the opportunity to connect with you guys. I very much appreciate your attention. I can feel my leg is bouncing because I feel energized by this. So that's the name, what's going on for you, whatever it is, and breathe. Short in, long out is going to calm you from sympathetic, heading back towards parasympathetic, and then go into regulated breathing, because ultimately what we want is the ability to flex back and forth. So regulated breathing, at least 6 minutes, in for 4, out for 4. And then the third thing we talked about is the benefit and the gift of reaching out to somebody to be a mindful listening partner to you. And hopefully you guys can do this, keep doing this with each other. Reaching out to somebody and asking them to give you 10 minutes or so in which you get to speak about what's on your mind, and they get to reflect, empathize, validate, and then hopefully help you redirect yourself back towards your own inner wisdom. So on that note, that's it. I'm done. So thank you.
This was awesome. And I wish that I had known about breakout rooms a little earlier. So thanks for teaching me something new. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I just want to thanks to Jolina. And what we will do tomorrow is send out an email to you guys with the recording and how to reach her. And such a great session. I think this was it was interesting to do it virtually, in my opinion, because there weren't other distractions when you're in a room with, 30 other people. So it was fun. I just want to leave it open one more time. If you have any other questions for Jolina. No, I'm looking around the room. And so thanks again. And you will see on Facebook and via email what, where, and when our next event is in August. And we look forward to seeing you all there. And thanks for participating. Like this is not easy. I don't know how many of you have been on Zoom for the last 3.5 months, but it's good stuff. So yeah. So thank you again. Much appreciated, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you in August.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Good night.
Jolina.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care, ladies.
Bye.
Bye.